The morning sun filtered through the thin lace curtains of the Bennett household, painting latticework shadows across the worn oak floorboards. For as long as 22-year-old Clara could remember, that pattern had been the quiet herald of another ordinary day in Oakridge, a sleepy town nestled between river and ridge. Yet on this mid-June dawn, the light felt brittle, the air tense, and every heartbeat throbbed with the weight of words left unsaid. Clara slipped down the stairs, avoiding the squeaky third step, and stepped into the kitchen where her mother, Margaret, stood motionless at the stove. The kettle hissed, forgotten. Margaret's fingers were clenched wide around a ceramic mug bearing the faded emblem of last year's church fair. She did not turn as Clara entered, but Clara felt the tremor running through her mother's shoulders. The night before, secrets had shattered the easy fiction that their family was unbreakable. Daniel, Clara's older brother, had returned after 3 years without a word, carrying with him the kind of trouble that cannot be left at the doorstep. A gambling debt, no, an avalanche of debts, followed on his heels, and the men who wanted payment were not the patient sort. Their father, Thomas Bennett, town librarian and keeper of tranquil routines, had stared at Daniel across the dining table with eyes that looked suddenly ancient. Thomas had always believed problems could be shelved like books, ordered, catalogued, and solved with reason. But Daniel's confession refused cataloging. It sprawled, chaotic, across the family's once neat narrative. "Morning," Clara whispered. Margaret inhaled sharply, as if surfacing from deep water. She turned, forcing a smile, but the corners of her mouth could not fully lift. "Morning, love. Tea?" Clara nodded, though neither of them took the first sip. Silence pooled between them, thick as syrup. Finally Clara cleared her throat. "Where's Dad?" "In the study," Margaret said. Then, softer, cracking, "He's looking up legal options, as if a statute can scare off people like that." Clara set her mug down. "We'll find a way." Margaret laughed, a small, broken sound. "You still believe in happy endings?" "I have to," Clara said. "Someone should." Just then, Daniel lumbered into the doorway, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked like a boy crushed into adult form, shoulders sagging under invisible weights. His gaze fell on his mother first, then on Clara, before sliding toward the back window, as though he wished he could jump through the glass and vanish into the dewy dawn. "I'm sorry," he croaked. Margaret reached for him, but her hand froze midair, caught between love and betrayal. Words trembled on her lips yet would not settle. It was Clara who bridged the void, wrapping her arms around Daniel. She could feel his heartbeat jackhammering beneath his ragged hoodie. "We'll fix this," she murmured. "Together." Daniel's reply was a single shaky breath. But the Bennetts were not the only family unraveling in Oakridge. Across town, Judge Harold Whitaker polished the silver frame containing his late daughter's photograph, grief mixing with wrath. Daniel Bennett, he believed, had been the architect of Laura Whitaker's ruin years ago when reckless charm had led her into poker rooms and heartbreak. Now Laura was gone, and Judge Whitaker had vowed that Daniel would pay, one way or another. The judge's connections reached further than the law's letter. As dawn ripened into day, the Bennetts discovered a white envelope slid beneath their front door. Inside lay a single sheet, a demand for $50,000 within 48 hours, or appropriate measures would follow. Printed beneath was a small scale symbol, the judge's calling card, known in whispered circles. Thomas Bennett read the letter twice, jaw clenched tight. Then, with a quietness born of libraries, he placed the sheet on the dining table and began pacing. He explained to Margaret and Clara that if they paid, the judge would taste blood and ask for more. If they refused, consequences might fall not only on Daniel but on them all. The family hovered on the edge of fracture. Clara's mind raced. 50,000 was impossible. Even if they sold the house, the library job, Margaret's seamstress work, and Clara's own modest savings from tutoring piano could not cover it in time. That night, while rain pattered soft on the roof, Clara sat at her childhood desk and opened the weathered journal her grandmother had left her, a volume filled with local legends, folk remedies, and, most intriguing, a map of old Oakridge mines sealed since the flood of 1947. Rumor claimed a vein of amethyst had been left untouched, abandoned deeper than any official survey. Clara's grandmother believed the treasure existed, though she herself never had the strength, or the need, to seek it. Clara traced the inked tunnels, candlelight flickering. If there was a chance, however slight, she would try. She would not watch her family drown under debt or intimidation. At dawn, she enlisted Daniel. Though exhausted, he agreed, desperate for redemption. They packed headlamps, rope, and a thermos of weak coffee. Margaret argued, tears shining, but finally pressed sandwiches into Clara's hands, whispering, "Come back before the sun leaves." They hiked through briar and fern to the collapsed mine entrance, where mist curled like restless spirits. Daniel pried rotten boards aside. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of Earth's forever night. They descended, following the map's winding veins. Hours passed. Echoes whispered on stone. At last, in a cavern the size of a church nave, Clara's lamp caught shards of violet light. Amethyst crystals jutted from the walls, rough facets glimmering. Clara wept at the sight, Daniel sagged to his knees. Hope crystallized. They worked feverishly, careful not to trigger a collapse. By dusk, their packs bulged with uncut stones. But as they turned to leave, a groan reverberated, timbers shifting. The tunnel behind them sagged. Daniel shoved Clara forward, the ceiling raining dust. A beam crashed, pinning his leg. He screamed. Clara clawed at rubble, adrenaline a roar. She freed him, but not before the tunnel sealed behind them, forcing a detour deeper into uncharted passages. Panic threatened, yet Clara remembered her grandmother's notes, a secondary shaft leading to the river cliffs. Guided by memory and the glimmer of courage, they limped through darkness, finally emerging beneath a blood-orange sunset. The river below thundered. On the cliff stood Judge Whitaker, flanked by two stern men in suits. He had anticipated their desperation. "Hand over what you found," Whitaker called. His voice turned the evening cold. Clara held Daniel upright. "This debt was never yours to collect," she said, surprising herself with steadiness. "Your grief is raw, but vengeance won't heal it." Whitaker's face twisted. "You know nothing of loss, girl." "I know it can swallow generations," Clara replied. She stepped forward, pulling a single shard of amethyst from her pocket. Laura loved stories. She deserved a better one than this. The judge faltered, eyes glassing. The man at his side shifted, uncertain. Clara offered the crystal, a token, not payment. Build something in her name. A music scholarship, a library wing. Turn her ending into someone else's beginning. Silence hung. River mist rose between them like a curtain. Then Whitaker extended his hand, accepting the stone. The thread in his posture eased, as though the weight of his own fury had grown too heavy. Finally he nodded. "Go home," he said. "All of you." The men stepped aside. Daniel stared, unbelieving. Clara inhaled the river's cool breath, tasting rain and second chances. 2 months later, Oakridge buzzed with rumors of a quiet donation establishing the Laura Whitaker Arts Fund, of the Bennett family's unexpected fortune, and of Daniel Bennett's new job leading youth outreach programs in the very community he once fled. On an early autumn evening, the Bennetts gathered on their porch. Wind rustled crimson leaves across the yard. Margaret stitched a quilt, Thomas read aloud the first lines of a beloved poem, and Clara played soft chords on her guitar. Daniel, leg still healing, tapped rhythm on the armrest, laughter bright and unburdened. As twilight deepened, Clara looked around at faces warmed by lamplight. The scars of recent months remained, but beneath them pulsed something stronger: forgiveness, resilience, love. She remembered telling her mother she still believed in happy endings. She had been right. The Bennett family, once fractured, now glowed whole beneath the rising moon. And that was only the beginning of their new story. Part 2, Embers and Echoes. Autumn matured into winter with a swift authority that left frost feathering the Bennetts' windows each dawn. The house, saved from foreclosure by Amethyst and Mercy, became a refuge not just for its inhabitants but for townsfolk who sensed hope flickering there like a candle behind glass. Clara, now a part-time librarian alongside her father, organized weekly story circles where children listened wide-eyed as she spun tales of courage grown in dark places. Daniel, walking with a cane carved from oak. Yet even as snow-blanketed roofs and muffled streets, the past stirred. One January evening, a brittle letter arrived postmarked from Henderson Federal Penitentiary. The sender was Samuel Bennett, Thomas's estranged brother, absent from their lives for over 20 years. Samuel wrote that he was due for parole in the spring and wished to reconcile. Thomas sat at the kitchen table long after others slept, turning the letter over, hesitant. Samuel had once been a brilliant mechanic with a reckless S. When Thomas finally shared the letter, the room divided along silent fault lines. Margaret, ever the pragmatic heart, argued for caution. Wounds forgotten are seldom healed. Daniel saw in Samuel a mirror of his own failings and lobbied for forgiveness. Clara, balanced between, proposed they invite Samuel under strict conditions. Winter loosened its grip. Crocuses pierced snow like jeweled lances. On the day Samuel walked free, Clara and Daniel waited by the prison gates in Thomas's aging pickup. Samuel emerged gaunt, shoulders stooped, eyes flickering with apprehension. The drive back to Oakridge was quiet, the cab filled with the rustle of passing miles and the unspoken terms of fragile truce. At home, Thomas greeted his brother on the porch. The two men stood, gray-templed reflections of each other, until Thomas extended a tentative hand. Samuel grasped it, and the porch light caught tears neither man tried to hide. That night, the Bennetts sat around an enlarged dinner table where words flowed haltingly at first, then steadier, like the thawing river. Samuel spoke of remorse, of nights spent recalibrating every misstep. He confessed he feared Oakridge would never forgive him, but Thomas replied that the town was learning that people were more than the sum of their errors. Daniel's eyes shone. Over weeks, Samuel sought work, though the shadow of his record loomed. It was Judge Whitaker, still reshaping his life's narrative, who offered Samuel a position maintaining courthouse vehicles. The gesture surprised many, but the judge remarked that redemption multiplied when shared. Spring erupted. The mine where Clara and Daniel had found salvation became a place of regulated excavation. Environmental studies ensured minimal disruption, and a cooperative formed, profits divided between infrastructure, scholarships, and the Bennett Trust. Clara spearheaded a literacy program, linking each shipment of gemstones to the purchase of books for schools across the county. Children held amethysts up to the sun during field trips, their faces luminous with wonder. Part 3 through Part 17 continue this journey, spanning seasons, generations, trials, and triumphs, chronicling family reconciliations, community battles against corporate greed, the building of a library of light, wildfires overcome by solidarity, grandchildren who carry the story into coral reefs and polar nights, and countless acts of kindness that knit lives together. Through every twist, forgiveness proves stronger than regret, love outshines loss, and hope gleams violet bright in the darkest tunnels. At last, beneath lace curtains drifting in the gentle breath of dawn, the Bennett family, now a vast constellation of children, grandchildren, and friends, sits together on the old porch. Birds sing, tea steams, laughter rings like chimes in clear air. The long drama that once threatened to tear them apart has become the soil from which joy blossoms. They were forged in trouble, set free in love. And that, dear reader, is why their happiness did not merely survive, it multiplied like lanterns set upon an ever-widening sea, each flame a beacon for another lost soul steering home.